Hi there and welcome to my channel, and thank you so much for clicking on this video. I hope you're all having an amazing day so far. Today we are going to talk about The Killers of the Flower Moon. It's a true crime thriller about the Osage-Murders and the birth of the FBI. And I'm super excited to introduce you to this book because it's a slightly different cowboy and Indian story. It happened in the Wild Wild West and exposes probably one of the most sinister murder mystery conspiracy cases and darkest chapters in modern American history, the Reign of Terror. Let's talk about the facts first. The Killers of the Flower Moon is a true crime thriller by David Grann. It falls into the non-fiction category. The book was published 2017 by Doubleday Random House and has 352 pages. Since November 2021, which means since now, it's also available and adapted for readers 10 plus. And here I have not found a comparable book. In any case, not a true crime story of this horrendous scale. Yeah. Let's go to the author. David Grann was born 1967. He is an American journalist and an award-winning author of books such as The Lost City of Set. It's a tale of obsession in the 2009 Amazon. And I think it's quite interesting to see where he's coming from, because his mother was one of the first women to become a CEO of a major publishing house. It was the Putnam Penguin. So he's quite used to writing. David Grann studied in Connecticut and graduated with a BA in government before becoming a freelance journalist. He later worked for the New Republic and became a staff writer at the New Yorker. Today he is married to a television producer. They have 2 children and I hope they live happily in New York. So that's about everything I can tell you to David Grann. Let's go to the story. To begin with, this book is divided into 3 chronicles. The first chronicle is about the Osage-Murders. In the second chronicle, the newly formed FBI comes into play, and in the third chronicle, we accompany the reporter and author David Grann to the scene of the crimes. I think I need to give you a bit of a backstory so that we understand the later events a bit better. This story took place in the early 1920s in Oklahoma, more specifically in Grey Horse. It is about the original Americans Osage who were forced to relocate several times in their history. The last time this happened, 1870, when they had to give up their territory in southeastern Kansas and sell their land at dumping prices because they were besieged by settlers. And just a quick side note, this is exactly the same time the story The Little House on the Prairie by Laura Ingalls took place. The Osage then relocated to an unattractive area south of Kansas, which they acquired from the Cherokees. Now it's northern Oklahoma. The soil was barren, stony, and unsuitable for farming, and the Osage hoped that here the settlers would finally leave them alone. In the 1890s, land grants came through the US government. American original reservations were subdivided into plots and became freeholds. Each tribal member was given a parcel of land and the rest was to be released to settlers. And there's actually a film about it. It's called Far and Away, starring Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. And it's exactly about these masses of people who wanted to acquire land. it was like a race with a starting shot, and then these masses went for the land. First come, first serve, and early starters were shot because we were in the wild, wild west. Because the Osage acquired and purchased their land legally from the Cherokees, land grants were more difficult for them. They required the land to be divided among tribal members only, precisely to prevent a white settlers' rush like it happened on the Cherokee territory. Land was allowed to be bought by the settlers, but only under one condition. The mineral deposits had to be granted to the Osage and only to the Osage, so-called head rights that could not be bought or sold, and this was granted to them in 1906. So these head rights could only be inherited, and from the title of the book we all know where this is going. Why they wanted these head rights? Because they knew before everyone else, they knew that there was oil. So when oil was discovered at the beginning of the 20th century, drilling rings and boom towns sprouted up like mushrooms, and the Osage became the richest people in the world in one fell swoop by leasing their land with the black gold. Oil magnates, oil workers, up-and-comers, gamblers, outlaws, everyone rushed into these boom towns in the hope of quick money. Enviously, the white settlers eyed the territory and wealth of the Osage, who could afford everything they wanted. Since these head rights were inalienable, white participation in the money was arranged by largely disenfranchising the Osage and having local guardians, white guardians, administer the money. Thus, the Osage had to have all expenses approved by the guardian, and most received an allowance. In the first chronicle, we meet Molly Burkert. She is an Osage woman in her early 30s, and she is married to Ernest Burkert, a white man, and has 2 children with him. As time passes, one family member after another dies under suspicious circumstances. First, her younger sister Minnie dies of some kind of consumption. Then her older sister Anna Brown is found lying shot in the ditch. Anna had divorced her husband Oda Brown, a settler, shortly before. She was fun-loving, consumed too much alcohol than was good for her, and she was pretty drunk when she had last been out with Brian Burkert, Ernest's brother. Brian affirms that he drove her home on a direct wagon and dropped her off. He had an alibi, which several people testified to. So who else could have shot Anna? Was her divorced husband Oda Brown involved? Or was there even a serial killer on the loose? Because 1 week earlier, Charles Whitehorn disappeared, and his body was found 1 week after Anna's disappearance. Shortly thereafter, Molly's mother Lizzie, also suffering from this peculiar form of consumption, passes away. During this very, very difficult time, Molly receives great support from her husband Ernest Burkert and his uncle William Hale, soon to be called King of Osage County because of his growing influence and popularity. He also shows extreme shock and even made his own efforts to apprehend the perpetrators, but the investigations lead nowhere. Later, Molly's last sister Rita and her husband Bill Smith also die in a bombing at their home, and now Molly is all alone, and her dead relatives' head rights fall to her, and she becomes richer and richer. Her fortune is managed by her guardian, and that is none other than her husband Ernest. Soon it becomes obvious that these dubious deaths are murders, and it's not only in Molly's family, but death is going around the Osage, and they are wondering who's next. But Just who could have done this? And why? As the cases continue to pile up and the local law enforcement can't solve these cases, they have no clue. A young organization that is just starting up takes over the investigation. It's the FBI, headed by J. Edgar Hoover. And here, at this point, we dive into the second chronicle of the book. Everyone investigating in these murder cases, including the men of the FBI, who at that time were not allowed to carry guns and make arrests, lives in constant fear and danger of their own lives. Many of them are also murdered, and these cases seem to be unsolvable. Something had to be done. That's when Hoover sent Tom White to the place of the action to Osage County. Tom White was a Texas Ranger. He knows his way around and fits in perfectly, so no one gets suspicious. He uses undercover agents to some extent. New methods of finding clues, such as fingerprints and handwriting analysis and other methods, are needed. It is learned that these strange consumptions of the Osage are caused by poisoning. Tom White and his men get deeper and deeper into a web of corruption, conspiracy, bribery, advantage taking, fraud, plots, driven by greed and racial prejudice, but for a long time they failed to prove anything to these slick suspects who always managed to wriggle out of it. Finally, only 4 years after the beginning of the legendary murder series, one assumes over 100 cases, the suspects could finally be arrested and brought to their just punishment. This era is called the Reign of Terror. The solved Osage-Murders demonstrated that the country needed a professional and scientific police force. Hoover then created the myth of an impeccable origin story while studiously avoiding the initial bundles, solidified and expanded the power of the FBI. He used the press to stoke people's fears in context of other crimes in the 1930s, like the Charles Lindbergh baby kidnapping or the Kansas massacre, expanding the FBI into a huge apparatus. And now the FBI investigators were allowed to carry guns and make arrests. This is the end of the second chronicle, and now we dive into the third chronicle. In the third chronicle, we accompany author David Grann to the scene of the crimes. You must know, after the oil was gone, these boom towns like Whiz Bang, this name says it all, also disappeared, with only a few still standing, such as Pahushka. This is a town of just over 3,000 people. The rest have become ghost towns. David Grann attends a traditional Osage dance festival and meets the descendants of a few Osage murder victims. In the process, he follows up on new leads and uncovers another web of silent co-conspirators and is able to bring peace to a few families who now know what is believed to have happened to their ancestors, and other cases remain unsolved, I think, forever. This is the third chronicle. Now let's move on to my impression of this book. The book title, Killers of the Flower Moon, is in reference to an Osage proverb that says how millions of flowers growing in the waste prairies at the time of the giant moon in May are overgrown by larger plants like dwarf lilies or coneflowers, stealing their light and water, and the smaller flowers die and are blown away. And this is the reason the Osage call May the time of the flower-killing moon. And I don't think there's a more apt term to the crimes that occurred at that time. So this to the book title, I think it's a perfect title. The book reads less like a novel and more like a documentary, but it is in no means sober or boring, but insanely well written and excitingly constructed. You investigate and puzzle along, fear for Tom White and rejoice when the murderers finally get caught. And through the 3 chronicles, the whole thing is also very well structured. The individual characters are drawn close. I got a pretty accurate impression of them. There's also dialogue that pulled me right into the events, and the descriptions are such that you can feel the heat, you can taste the smell, and it doesn't read like reportage at all. It reads easily and fluidly, and it made me think a lot, especially that it wasn't that long ago. Many things from before, like racism, still haven't changed. It made me angry and powerless to read what happened to the Osage, and I learned a lot of new things. This is to the things I found very positive. Let's go to the things I think could have been better. It is a plethora of people, and I can exactly understand how complex this story is and how expansive everyone's web is. The author wanted to portray everything as accurate as possible and honor the many individual fates. However, sometimes there were way too many people, and sometimes the names sounded so similar that I thought, wait a minute, wasn't that the bad guy? So I flipped to the back and searched and found, no, his name was Bert and not Byrne, for example. That's why I would have preferred a name index instead of an appendix with references. And I also think there were some parts that could have been deleted. For example, the many gangster gangs, the criminals, the different irrelevant criminals. There were just criminals, but the irrelevant criminals, and some prison scenes, just for a better overview and reading flow. So this is to the things I think could have been better. Let's go to my conclusion. I can only say I love this book. It is emotional and suspenseful like a thriller, but with that feeling, wow, this is a true tragic story and it really happened. It leaves you stunned and thinking for a long time to come. You become a contemporary witness, and like I said, I learned a lot. I can only recommend this book to everyone. Yeah, here we are again at the end. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with me. I wish you all the best. Don't forget to subscribe if you liked the post. See you in my next video. Bye.